What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett, bringing you guys the final video of the offseason, I guess you could say, outside of the Week 1 preview. I know Week 0 has kicked off, but this is kind of the last video, last chapter of kind of previewing the season ahead. And this will be my college football playoff bracket prediction, and also my prediction ultimately for how that bracket will play out and who plays for and wins the national championship. Before I reveal all that, though, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. Getting things started, I'm going to be going over kind of the outlook for each conference, going over the teams that I think are in any sort of running for making the playoffs, starting in the ACC, and I've previewed each of these conferences in separate videos if you want to go back and check those out. Clemson, I think, goes 12-1. I think they have a loss in there somewhere. I think they're ACC champs over Duke, who I have as the dark horse, and I think Miami they kind of trip up on those games that they should win maybe later in the season, and also I think they lose Week 1 against Notre Dame. So I have Duke at 10-3 and Miami at 9-3, just to kind of round that out, so you guys can kind of picture what I'm talking about here later on when I go over teams on the bubble. In the Big Ten, I talked about this. I think there's a three-way tie at the top of the Big Ten. I projected this a couple years ago. Didn't end up shaping out this way, but I think there's a decent chance it does this year. I have Ohio State at 11-2 as the champs. I have them losing a non-conference game against Texas. I have them losing that regular season finale against Michigan. And then I have Penn State finishing at 11-1. And I have Michigan finishing at 10-3. I have them losing in Norman to Oklahoma. And then I also have them losing a game to either Nebraska or USC. I think they kind of are figuring things out early in the season. I think defense really clicks. I think it looks a little similar to what it did last year, but I think they get more wins. I don't think they slip up against Illinois or Washington because I think Bryce Underwood is going to be a much better quarterback than the play that they had in those losses especially. Then I have Oregon at 10-2 and Illinois at 9-3. Out of the Big 12, I have Arizona State at 12-1 as the conference champions. My projection, and I'm going to stick with it because it's my gut, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Oh well. I have them winning over Kansas State, who I have at 10-3. That was before Kansas State lost Week 0 to Iowa State. I think Iowa State finishes 10-2. So now, because of the tiebreaker, that kind of changes my projections. Iowa State would go to the conference championship game. Kansas State would be at home if they finish tied. And then I also have Texas Tech at 10-2. Then, out of the SEC, there's a lot of teams here, as you might expect. Texas I have at 12-1 as the conference champions. Alabama, 11-2 as the runner-up. Florida at 10-2. They are my pick. Kind of a little bit of a dark horse. I know some people have them in their playoff brackets, but I think 10-2 is maybe a little bit better than what some people have the Gators finishing at. And then, also Georgia at 10-2, kind of similar there. I'm still kind of deciding who I think they're going to lose to this year. I think they could lose to Florida, to Texas, or to Alabama. One of those teams in there. I think the Bulldogs lose to probably 2 out of those 3 this year. And then we have a bunch of 9-3 teams that are going to make for a heated discussion. My projections leave LSU, South Carolina, and Oklahoma all at 9-3 and 6-3 in conference. And guess what? The way I have things shaken out, I have LSU losing to Oklahoma. I have Oklahoma losing to South Carolina, and I have South Carolina losing to LSU. So if you're following along there, it's 1-1, 1-1, and 1-1 against common opponents there. So how the committee would make a selection there will be very, very difficult, and that could be a decision they have to make. Finally, out of the group of 5, this is another one that's going to be very interesting because they're going to have the same loss. It's Navy out of the American Conference. They're my prediction to win the American at 12-1, and then Boise State out of the Mountain West to win. I also have them at 12-1. The thing is here, their quality loss, both play at Notre Dame, so it might come down for that group of 5 spot to who has the better loss to the Fighting Irish. I do expect both to lose those games. If one of those was at home, I could see the Broncos maybe pulling an upset especially, but I do think that's a loss for both of those teams. Then outside of that, if they run the table, these are the resumes that we're looking at. Navy with wins over UTSA, at Memphis, a neutral site against Army, and at North Texas. And I think I also have them projected to beat UTSA in the conference championship game. I don't think they play them in the regular season. Then Boise State, their key wins. UNLV, I have Colorado State actually twice because I have the Rams getting to the Mountain West Championship game, and then at Air Force. The Broncos, I think it comes down ultimately to strength of schedule, unless there's a real big discrepancy in that loss to Notre Dame. Boise State, 77th strength of schedule, and Navy's not far behind at 86. So that could, depending on how these teams' opponents do in the regular season, shake out completely differently. So I think we're going to have a big debate. I could be wrong about it being Navy. I could be wrong about it being Boise State, but I think we're going to have a really good debate when it comes to the end of the season, especially if we have a one-loss American Conference champion and a one-loss Mountain West champion, and especially if that's Navy and Boise State. Finally, the independent, Notre Dame. I think they, out of the independents, are the only one with a real shot at the college football playoff. And I think the Fighting Irish, especially if they get past Miami in week 1, I think they run the table and finish 12-0. So let's go through this bracket. I'm going to start actually with the highest ranked seed and then go through the 4 teams with the bye and probably work my way down to about number 10, and then I'll let you know who I have in that number 11 spot. So number 1, this could be different. If Clemson runs the table, I think they get in. There maybe would be some debate. Oh, Texas plays a tougher schedule. They have 1 loss. They deserve to get ahead of Clemson. But I think Clemson would go ahead of them. Regardless, I think Clemson does have 1 loss in there, whether it's an ACC play or maybe to South Carolina or even LSU. That would change things for LSU. So I have Texas at number 1, though. Clemson would be a close second, but I think Notre Dame... I do think Notre Dame, though, is the team, not being a conference champion, that would be stuck behind probably Texas, potentially Clemson, but I'm going to go with Notre Dame at number 2, Clemson at 3, and then Ohio State at 4. I know conference champions is not an automatic bid, but I've got Alabama, who loses a conference championship game and finishes with the same record as Ohio State. I could see the committee putting Alabama there, but either way, it's 4 versus 5. One team gets a bye, and they likely face each other in the quarterfinals anyway. So it's just a matter of who gets a home game and who gets a bye really here. So Ohio State 4, Alabama 5. 6, I have Penn State. I also kind of went back and forth here because Penn State would have 1 fewer loss, but I think Alabama should and probably would be rewarded for getting to their conference championship game. Then the surprise here, and I think this comes down obviously to what happens in this matchup, but I am going with Florida. I think they beat Georgia this year. They were really pretty close, especially in that first half before DJ Lagway got injured. And for Florida, that game against Texas, I think would have looked way different if he was healthy for that one. So I have Florida there. I also then, this is close discussions here. 8 and 9, if my projections are correct, would be really close. You'd have Georgia, who would be 10 and 2. Not really a lot of quality wins, though. They have a fairly easy schedule, and if they finish 10 and 2, that means that 2 out of their top 3 games, which would probably be against playoff teams, would be losses. 2 out of those 3, while Oregon would also have kind of 2 losses in there. Wouldn't be that impressive. Obviously, it would be a huge deal because this one's either in Autzen or at Sanford Stadium. So that is a big discussion here. I think that could be something that comes down to it at the end of the season. I'm going with Oregon ranked at number 8, Georgia ranked at number 9. But again, that's very tight. I think with Georgia's schedule last year, they're easily number 8. But this year, I'm going to go with Oregon ahead of the Bulldogs. Then at number 10, I have Michigan finishing with that 10 and 3 record, Big Ten runner-up. And then, here we go. Number 12, I'm going with Boise State, like I said earlier. So it comes down, I think, there'd be some discussion for Iowa State, Texas Tech, even Kansas State finishing with 10 wins out of the Big 12. Potentially for Illinois and Miami as 3-loss teams, but I think those teams would have to lose just 2 games to really have a fighting chance. So I think it comes down to LSU, South Carolina, and Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma, with what I have projected wins over Michigan and LSU, losses to Texas and Alabama and also South Carolina. And again, this is where either way, 2 fan bases are going to be really pissed off if my situation comes to fruition. But I'm going with Oklahoma being a surprise team getting in the playoffs. So I have Florida and Oklahoma getting into the playoff out of the SEC, and LSU and South Carolina on the outside looking in. And Ole Miss as well, but I have them 8 and 4, so they're not really in the discussion. So first round, let's just go from 8 versus 9, 5 versus 12, 6 versus 11, 7 versus 10. I think Oregon, home field advantage would be a big thing here. I think the Bulldogs probably have the better, more physical defense, but I think the Ducks have a better offense. So I have Oregon winning at home. I have Alabama, I think, pretty comfortably beating Boise State. I have Penn State beating Oklahoma. I think John Mateer and Jaden Ott are really good, but I think Penn State's core is just going to be too much for the Sooners, especially in Happy Valley. And then I think Florida, it's going to be a battle. That'd be a fun battle to see. DJ Lagway against Bryce Underwood at quarterback. Couple pretty good defenses, really good Michigan defense. But I think the Swamp is a really tough place to go and win. And so I have Florida winning there. So all home teams, but I think that's kind of to be expected. If I remember correctly, that's what happened this past year. So I think in college football, that's a huge advantage. Not as much in the NFL, huge in college football. Rolling through these quarterfinal matchups, I think it's kind of similar here. At least in two of the matchups, I have Texas beating Oregon. I think Texas is probably the most well-rounded team, maybe outside of Clemson this year or Penn State. I have Alabama over Ohio State. I think Ohio State, I've heard this before, that they're probably in a, get to ideally like at least the semifinals, and then you're kind of building for next year where you have Julian Sayin back at quarterback. You have Jeremiah Smith again back at wide receiver, assuming he doesn't transfer somewhere. Caleb Downs is probably gone, but then you have kind of guys who played this year flowing with that defense. So I think Ohio State's got a really good shot to win 2 out of 3 national championships. I think it's going to be really hard for the Buckeyes to go back-to-back, though. Penn State against Clemson, boy, I would hate it if this game is a quarterfinal. I think this is a game deserving of the national championship stage. I think there's 3 teams this year in college football that I think are really national championship caliber. I think it's Texas, like I talked about. I think it's Penn State, and I think it's Clemson. And if these 2 teams met in a quarterfinal, oh my goodness, would it be just hard to see one of these 2 teams lose, because Penn State is loaded. They've got that core. They've got big returners on defense, contributors who are stepping up into big roles. And then you've got Clemson, who has probably one of the best defensive lines. They've probably got the best quarterback in college football, 3 receivers coming back. I don't think their core gets talked about enough, their quarterback and receivers. Ultimately, though, they did show kind of some weaknesses this past year that I think will be improved this coming season. But I think Penn State plays with a little bit of fire after, I think, losing the regular season to Ohio State, kind of like Ohio State losing to Michigan. And I think Penn State would get past Clemson. And then Notre Dame against Florida. I think Florida has a lot of promise. I think they're kind of in a situation similar to Ohio State. I think it's like you look like 2 years ahead, and that's where their biggest potential is, especially with a 5-star freshman wide receiver like Dallas Wilson as well. Pairing him with DJ Lagway could be really good for the Gators come 2026. So I have the Fighting Irish moving on. Then Texas against Alabama. This is a rematch of the SEC championship game. Again, on a neutral site. I think it's the same result here. I have Texas winning, though I think the Crimson Tide are going to be set for a solid future. They just need to kind of work out the kinks that resulted in that loss to Oklahoma last year and the loss to Vanderbilt as well. And then Penn State, I think this time, a little bit of revenge, get past Notre Dame, and it'd be, again, a battle of 2 of the best running back tandems in college football, probably the very 2 best, along with some pretty good defenses. So I have Texas against Penn State, and I think ultimately it's, I think this year, you look at 3 teams, Texas, Penn State, and Clemson. I think next year, Arch Manning has a lot of promise, and I think he's not going to be, like, scared of the big moment for sure. I don't even think he's going to be intimidated by it in any way. But I think the experience that Penn State has will ultimately win out. So I have Penn State winning the national championship game. I think they're going to be motivated. And whether Michigan doesn't do as well as they do and Penn State beats Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, and then that would look different. I'd probably have them at 3, Clemson at 4, and maybe those teams do meet in the national championship game instead. But I think Penn State, they maybe have that loss to Ohio State. Maybe they avenge it in the Big Ten championship, but I think they play with that fire, just like Ohio State had in the 2024 season. So I have Penn State winning it all. I think looking ahead to the future of college football, I think it's Texas in 2026, though their defense is going to look way different after they lose some guys most likely to the NFL, some really important players. I think Ohio State with that quarterback wide receiver tandem, if Sayin lives up to the hype, and assuming Smith stays at Ohio State, I wouldn't imagine he leaves. And then Florida. If you're looking at 2026, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I would put some stock in those 3 teams, because I think when you look kind of at the futures, I think those 3 teams are the teams that you could stake a claim in right now. But again, the point of this video is to project 2025. I think Penn State wins the national championship game over Texas and continues this run of success that the Big Ten has had. So that's my prediction for the college football playoff for 2025. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, who you think takes the title this year. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.